This is one of the most interesting articles to me that comes out every single year by Athlon Sports. Anonymous SEC coaches talking about other SEC teams. Bear with me for the backdrop and the setup. This is the best I could do. I'm on the road right now. And the things that they said about Georgia are not super surprising. I want to go through what Athlon Sports reports that SEC coaches are saying about Georgia's football program right now, and kind of break down, because they talk a little bit about past players, they talk about current players, talk about just the program in general. We can run through some of the things that they're saying about other programs, because I think it's kind of interesting. But let's focus on Georgia here. The first thing that they've got, right? And so I don't know which coach said this, what the validity of this is, but this is a report that Athlon Sports likes to do yearly, just getting anonymous quotes about the other SEC programs. This is the first thing. With Nick Saban retired, this is the best overall program in college football right now. If the current Ohio State staff had a national title, you might make an argument there, but entering 24, this is the standard. So the Ohio State part's a little bit interesting to me. I don't really know where that part comes from. If they had a title going into this in the last few years, I don't understand how that would be better than 2 titles, especially back-to-back titles, and just being in contention the way that Georgia has the last 7 years. They've been, obviously Ohio State's been in contention as well for championships, but Georgia's won, and they've won 2, and a lot of people think that they might win. There's a quote about it, but a lot of people think they might win 3 and 4 years. So Georgia, I think, is kind of clearly the number 1 program as long as Nick Saban's not around, and assuming that Alabama does take this step back, and I actually do want to read some of the quotes to you about Alabama. Let's move on to the next one. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post, by the way, make sure you're checking out our newsletter in the link down below. We're not hitting you up with it every single day right now just because it's the off season and there's not quite as much content, but we're still pushing out stories to you guys, so make sure you're looking at that link down below. It's free. Check it out. I appreciate it, and I appreciate if you've already done that. The next thing that they said, if you're looking for a fault, it might be that all of Carson Beck's safety valve options at receiver and tight end are gone. Timeout in the quote. Brock and Ladd, that's who they're talking about. They're talking about Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey, and yes, not only were they safety valves for Carson, which I think they were, and the Auburn game shows it to you, really the best. Because I don't think that they really needed to save themselves any other time other than the South Carolina game, and neither of them made this gigantic impact against South Carolina. He goes on to say, obviously, they brought in some studs, added what they recruited, but having a Brock Bowers is like a cheat code for a young quarterback. It is. So is having Marvin Harrison Jr., so is having Bijan Robinson, so is having all sorts of really, really good players. But yes, Brock Bowers was a little bit of a cheat code for the Georgia Bulldogs. One of the best tight ends that I think that football has ever seen, just football in general has ever seen, and obviously on the collegiate level, arguably the best that we've seen at that position. So let's move on. I mean, they talk about bringing in, Kobe Young, I think is going to matter. I think that the other 2 receivers that they brought in have a chance to matter in this offense, although I think that you just see a step forward from the other guys like Dominic Lovett and even Rod Thomas and Dylan Bell. I just think that you're going to see a step forward from some other guys. Next one is something that we've talked a lot about this offseason, and it's a big part of why we think Georgia's going to be really good. So this next quote, this is Beck's offense now. So his development this offseason is crucial. It is very crucial. A lot of people, and I guess you can throw me in there, are working under the assumption that Carson is going to take a step forward this season, that he's going to be better than what he was in 2023, that he was a first-year starter, right? I mean, let's go through it. Like 3,900-ish yards. I don't have the exacts in front of me. 3,900 yards, 72% completion percentage, 24 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. I'm going to sneeze. That's great. That's really great for your first season. It should be better, right? I think even without Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey, you should expect a step forward as long as there's an emphasis on the passing game in the offense. And there definitely has been, more so the last 2 years than in a long time for Georgia. You'd have to go back like 10 years to see them pass at the rate that they're passing at. Or you'd have to go back to when they had Aaron Murray and guys like that, right? But they're just passing more than they used to. It's a different game of football. The personnel's different. They don't have a Nick Chubb. They don't have Todd Gurley or Sony. They don't have those guys. Their personnel is Carson Beck and a lot of really talented weapons on the outside. The other portion of it with Carson is the Mike Bobo portion and kind of reintegrating. There was a lot of new for Georgia last year, and it was obvious early on in the season. They talked about it recently Carson talked about it recently. Hey man, I wasn't completely comfortable at the beginning. Maybe they were holding him back a little bit. Kirby admitted that they may have been holding him back a little bit, and kind of rightfully so, especially when you get to play against, lesser opponents at the beginning of your tenure as Georgia's starter. But I think that the development this offseason is crucial, just as the quote says. Because if he doesn't, then Georgia's not going to be better than they were last year. And that's just what it is. And maybe they don't win a national championship. I think that if Carson does improve, that's a very likely scenario. Next thing is about the defensive line. Nazir Stackhouse and Warren Brinson are both back. And that defensive line should be better. They weren't bad, but Kirby Smart's standards, there was a step back after Jalen Carter and those guys left. But by Kirby Smart's standards, there's a step back. Yeah. Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt, Trayvon Walker, Nolan Smith, Robert Beal. There's a lot of guys that, I named a couple of linebackers, but that defensive line was not the same last year when you remove a Jalen Carter from that situation. And this quote hits whatever the quote is about hitting something on the head. It nailed the quote. They nailed it. Warren Brinson and Nazir Stackhouse were good, but I think that people expected a little bit more out of them last year. You kind of work into the assumption, well, they're just recruiting, they're developing all these guys. The next guys up are going to be just as good. And it's not always the case. And this is not Warren and Nas. I know you like to go by Nas sometimes. Warren, Nazir, if you guys are watching this, I'm not saying you're bad. I think you guys are really good football players. But it was obvious that they aren't Jalen Carter or Jordan Davis or something like that. And it did seem like they didn't play as well. I thought that they had plenty of better moments in 2022 than they did in 2023. Maybe it's easier when you're playing alongside a superstar like Jalen. But you would think that those guys going into year five for Nazir. He was in that class with Carson. I believe it's also year 5 for Warren Brinson. If not, I apologize. If you include the young guys that are going to step up with it, it should be better, right? As long as they have depth. Christian Miller decided he's not going to transfer. That helps them. I think it's a crucial point for Georgia's defense is that line. Because you're going to get a lot of new in the secondary. You know what you're getting out of linebackers. What are you getting out of the defensive line? Is it going to go back to the way it was a couple of years ago is my question. Last quote, they're still the first team to put in the conference title and playoff conversation. I think a lot of people feel that way. So let's look a little bit about what they're talking about Alabama before I log off. Maybe I'll talk about it one more. Here, I'm just going to rip off some things that they said about Alabama. There's so much change that it's hard to know how to scout them right now. This is still a very talented conference title caliber roster. There are some big questions like O-line, but they're not just going to fall off the face of the earth. The question is, if they have a bump, how patient is the fan base? It's a good question because I do think that they take a step back. What's a step back? 10-2? 9-3? I mean, it's not something that's ridiculous. And they still have an opportunity to go 12-0 or 11-1 because it's still going to be a really good football team. They made a comment about Jalen Milroe and compared him to Michael Penix Jr. If Jalen Milroe takes a big step forward and can run an offense that's based off of vertical passing, he's going to be the Heisman winner. And that's kind of my take. I don't expect him to make that huge jump. I do think that Kalen DeBoer is a good coach, but I don't know if it's going to work the way people think it will down in Tuscaloosa. And Michael Penix Jr. is an elite downfield passer. Elite. So I don't think that Jalen Milroe just all of a sudden knows how to do that once Washington's scheme's thrown in there. This has been the Anonymous Coaches Talk. Thanks for watching. Probably just one more, maybe 2 more videos from this location. Thanks for bearing with me as well.